This man makes people uncomfortable without saying a word. He's 42, living alone, not because he failed, not because he's broken, but because somewhere along the way, he stopped playing the game everyone else still pretends is real. And that terrifies them, because nothing threatens the system more than a man who needs nothing from it. You see it in their eyes when they ask the question, the one they're not supposed to ask but always do. Why aren't you married? Like it's a confession they're waiting for. Like your solitude is a crime that needs explaining. But here's what they're really asking. What do you know that I don't? Jung knew this. He said that gaining consciousness inevitably leads to isolation. Because when you see the machine for what it is, you can't unsee it. And once you can't unsee it, you can't participate the same way. You become dangerous, not because you're hostile, but because your existence asks a question the collective can't afford to answer. What if none of this is necessary? The individual who wishes to have an answer to the problem of evil, as it is posed today, has need first and foremost of self-knowledge. That is, the utmost possible knowledge of his own wholeness. Society runs on scripts. We're handed them early. Go to school, get the job, find the partner, make the family, consume, reproduce, retire, die having checked all the boxes, and we call this living. The more a man lays stress on false possessions and the less sensitivity he has for what is essential, the less satisfying is his life. He feels limited because he has limited aims, but most men follow it, not because they want to, because the alternative is too terrifying to consider. The script promises safety, meaning that if you just do what everyone else did, you won't have to face the one question that keeps people awake at 3 a.m. What if I'm wasting my life? The man who lives alone after 40 has already asked that question, and he didn't like the answer. Society tells you, you're getting old, so get married. Why do I have to get married? I haven't done anything wrong? That's the voice of a man who finally realized the game is rigged, that the social contract was signed in his name without his consent. Men feel coerced by social norms equating marriage with maturity or moral worth, but he refuses to be shamed into compliance. But nobody tells you what marriage has become. They sell you the Disney version love partnership forever. What they don't mention is the contract, the trap, the slow realization that what you thought was love was just another form of control. Listen to the men who lived it. She abused and took advantage of my good nature. I never got married again. I don't regret the kids. I regret the one I married. These aren't bitter men. These are men who trusted the script, who did everything right and got betrayed anyway. Many feel marriage turned into a trap, a place where love becomes control and goodness is mistaken for weakness. Here's the part society won't admit. The system rewards betrayal. Never get into a contract with someone who knows they can get rewarded for breaking it. Think about that. Marriage is sold as the ultimate bond, till death do us part. But the legal reality? It's a business arrangement where one party can walk away with half your life, your kids, and your paycheck, and society will applaud them for it. Marriage is inherently risky for the guy right now. The risks outweigh the rewards. This isn't cynicism, but math. Marriage feels like a legal liability, not an emotional bond. Men see divorce laws, alimony, custody, all stacked against them. And they're asking a very simple question. Why would I sign up for this? The culture has no answer. So it does what it always does when confronted with men who won't comply. It shames them. We don't even remember what marriage historically was. The institution has been gutted. What was once a practical arrangement for economic cooperation and social stability has been reimagined as a romantic ideal, yet the old expectations remain. Modern love ideology replaced older, structured forms of partnership. Men feel the contract has changed, but expectations haven't. Jung distinguished between the persona, the mask we wear, and the true self. Most men spend their entire lives maintaining a persona that satisfies external expectations while their true self remains buried, unexplored, undeveloped. Jung said it plainly, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But personal freedom doesn't stay personal for long. When one man steps out of line, the whole system feels the tremor. The solitary man after 40 has discovered his way, and in doing so, he's become a living critique of everyone who never questioned theirs. That's what makes him terrifying. This is where freedom turns to fear. When someone encounters a man living contentedly alone after 40, something strange happens. They don't see him, they see a mirror, and they don't like looking back. He must be damaged. He's selfish. He's missing out. Something's wrong with him. This is shadow projection. Jung explained it simply. We see in others what we hate in ourselves. When people criticize the solitary man's choices, they're not commenting on his life. They're externalizing their own repressed desires, doubts, and fears. The person who calls him selfish, they're suppressing their own desire to prioritize their needs. The one who says he's missing out, they secretly resent their own compromises. Envy disguises itself as concern. Aren't you lonely? As superiority. I could never be so isolated. As pity. Who will take care of you when you're old? But beneath these masks lies discomfort with one's own choices reflected in the mirror of another's freedom. But there's something darker at play here, something the culture doesn't want to admit, the gender empathy gap. When women can't find someone, people sympathize, wish the same treatment for men. Let that land. Single women get compassion, single men get contempt. Women who can't find partners are victims of circumstances. Men who can't find partners are losers who deserve their fate. Men's emotional struggles are invalidated, mocked, weaponized. The solitary man carries not just projections of freedom, but cultural contempt for male vulnerability. Emotional struggles of men are often invalidated or mocked. And when he refuses to perform suffering, when he says, "Actually, I'm fine," they hate him even more. Because if he's genuinely happy in solitude, then everything they sacrificed for companionship might have been unnecessary. Carl taught, if you imagine someone who is brave enough to withdraw all his projections, then you get an individual who is conscious of a pretty thick shadow. The individuated man recognizes these projections without defensiveness. He understands that when someone attacks his lifestyle, they're not seeing him. They're seeing their own shadow. And shadows only threaten people who refuse to look at them. Picture a man waking up to silence. Zero notifications, no demands, just stillness. That's silence. That's energy. Jung introduced the concept of psychic energy, the fundamental life force driving all psychological processes. He called it the current that fuels everything we think, feel, and create. In most people's lives, this energy hemorrhages, maintaining social obligations, managing relationships, fulfilling expectations, performing roles that have nothing to do with who you actually are. But the man who lives alone after 40 has begun the great reclamation, the return of his own energy. Now I can devote myself to myself for the first time. Read that again. For the first time. This is a man who spent decades giving his energy to everyone else, to work, to family, to the endless performance of being enough. And when the noise finally stopped, he realized something profound. He had no idea who he actually was. Here's the economic truth nobody talks about. If you're not trying to impress a girl, how much money do you not spend? Let that sink in. The entire economy is built on male performance. On men spending money, they don't have to impress women who wouldn't love them anyway. On men buying houses, they can't afford to prove they're stable. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. That's not a joke. That's an obituary for energy, for time, for the one life you actually get to live. The economic and emotional costs of relationships feel one-sided. Men crave freedom from external validation, a space for solitude, creativity, and self-growth. Jung wrote that, "Solitude is often the means by which one acquires something meaningful to bring into relationships. Not isolation, not bitterness, but concentrated focus on authentic development." When energy flows toward authentic expression rather than social performance, it produces genuine value. The artist who creates in solitude offers more to humanity than the socialite who attends every party. Consider Jung himself. In all chaos, there is a cosmos. In all disorder, a secret order. His most profound insights came during intense solitude. The collective unconscious, active imagination, archetypes. These didn't come from cocktail parties. They came from deep, solitary engagement with the psyche. The Hermetic principle, where attention goes, energy flows. The solitary man has learned to direct attention inward, and his life becomes a concentrated force rather than a diffuse presence. Every major institution in society, economic, religious, governmental, educational, relies on one fundamental assumption: that people will trade freedom for belonging. The nuclear family model isn't just cultural preference, it's an economic engine. It drives housing markets, consumer spending, education systems, inheritance structures. When a man opts out of this model, he disrupts the equation. He requires less housing, consumes less, participates less in structures designed for households. He stops feeding the machine that feeds on dependence. He becomes economically illegible, a category error in a system that profits from predictability. A group experience takes place on a lower level of consciousness than the experience of an individual. The institution of marriage no longer aligns with its original purpose: security, cooperation, legacy. All the gain for a man has been removed, all the burden stayed. But here's what really terrifies them. A man who doesn't need marriage lives free from society's control. Institutions maintain power through cultivating needs they can fulfill. Religions offer salvation. Governments offer security. Corporations offer status through consumption. Entertainment offers distraction from existential questions. All of these depend on manufacturing psychological lack. The individuated man has begun filling these voids from within. He doesn't need external validation because he's developing internal authority. He doesn't need constant distraction because he's comfortable with silence. He doesn't need to purchase an identity because he's discovering who he actually is. Foucault examined how power operates through normalization. Society doesn't explicitly punish deviation. It makes deviation uncomfortable. Through social pressure, economic disadvantage, cultural narratives that pathologize alternatives. But here's the crucial insight. The world will ask you who you are, and if you don't know, the world will tell you. The single man symbolizes a threat because he embodies independence from the social machine. Freedom as defiance. Henry David Thoreau, the great American philosopher, wrote, "A man is rich in proportion to the number of things he can afford to let alone. His minimalism isn't withdrawal, it's rebellion. Every unmet expectation is a quiet revolution." Throughout human history, across every culture, the figure of the hermit appears as an archetype of wisdom. This is not the hermit of bitterness or failure, but of deliberate withdrawal in service of deeper understanding. The hermit doesn't flee society because he hates humanity. He withdraws because he loves truth more than comfort. Before a man can love another, he must first learn to love himself. But here's what that actually means. Before you can love yourself, you must know yourself. And knowing yourself requires confronting what has been hidden, integration of shadows and darkness. This is the hermit's work, not running from the uncomfortable parts of himself, but sitting with them until they speak, understanding them, integrating them. Men are rediscovering identity beyond relationships, individuation through solitude. Jung suggested that solitude isn't merely an absence of others, but an active state, an opportunity to turn inward when the noise of society and external expectations fades. Without the constant input of others' opinions, desires, and projections, your authentic voice can finally be heard. In the tarot, the hermit stands alone on a mountain peak, holding a lantern. He climbed away from the valley where others dwell, not to abandon them, but to gain perspective. From his vantage point, he sees patterns invisible to those in the thick of things. His lantern represents the light of consciousness. He has done the inner work to illuminate what was dark. Consider the pattern. Buddha achieved enlightenment in solitary meditation. Jesus withdrew to the desert for 40 days. Jung retreated to Bullingen Tower. Newton developed theories during isolation, withdrawal, inner work, integration, return with gifts for the collective. The key distinction: isolation is imposed, lonely, barren. Solitude is chosen, peaceful, generative. The man after 40 who lives alone has transitioned from fearing isolation to embracing solitude. He has learned what the mystics knew. Silence is not empty, it's full. Jung wrote, "The archetype of spirit in the form of an old man appears in dreams as a magician, doctor, priest, teacher, professor, grandfather, or any person possessing superior insight. The hermit follows this pull away from the crowd's noise and toward the whisper of his own soul." By the time a man reaches 40, he has typically spent 4 decades perfecting his persona: the competent professional, the dutiful son, the reliable friend, the acceptable partner. He has learned which parts of himself to show and which to hide. He has become, in a sense, a performance artist of normality. Living alone after 40 often catalyzes persona collapse. When you spend significant time outside social contexts, the mask becomes harder to maintain. There's no audience requiring the performance. The question arises, who am I when no one is watching? For many, this question provokes an identity crisis. For others, it initiates liberation. People wear masks that prevent them from seeing who they are themselves. To strip off one's mask is the great work of the individual. This is why authentic individuation appears dangerous to society. A person living authentically is unpredictable. You cannot control them through social expectations because they've stopped seeking social approval. You cannot manipulate them through fear of judgment because they've made peace with being misunderstood. The mask isn't entirely negative. We need some degree of persona to function socially. But when the mask becomes so thick that it smothers the true self beneath, we lose contact with our authentic nature. The solitary life creates space for the mask to thin, for authenticity to breathe. There's profound courage in this unmasking. It means accepting that some people will reject your authentic self. It means facing the possibility that you've been living someone else's idea of who you should be. It means admitting that much of what you thought was you was actually performance. But it also means encountering genuine freedom. When you stop performing, you start living. When you stop seeking approval, you discover what you actually value. When you stop wearing masks, you finally meet your own face. The man who lives alone after 40 threatens society not through action, but through example. He is dangerous in the way that a free man is dangerous to a slave society. His very existence poses the question that cannot be asked without destabilizing the entire structure. because nothing threatens the system more than a man who needs nothing from it. "No, I have life." That's what one man said when asked if he was lonely. Not "I'm fine," not "I'm managing," but "I have life." Another observer notes, "He doesn't destroy society, he frees it." This is the core terror. The solitary man proves that the social contract is optional, that you can opt out and not only survive, but thrive. Jung understood that individuation is inherently subversive. Freedom stretches only as far as the limits of our consciousness. The individuated man is ungovernable in the quietest way possible. He cannot be guilt-tripped into conformity because he no longer accepts the collective's definition of obligation. He cannot be shamed into compliance because he has made peace with being different. He cannot be bribed with status because he values autonomy more than approval. This is why society labels such men as selfish, broken, dangerous, or abnormal. These labels are defensive mechanisms. If his choice is valid, then perhaps their sacrifices were unnecessary. If he's happy in solitude, then perhaps companionship is not the universal need they've been told. Krishnamurti, the Indian spiritual speaker, once said, "It is no measure of health to be well-adjusted to a profoundly sick society." The solitary man who has individuated has become maladjusted to collective sickness. He refuses to participate in unconscious patterns. He will not sleepwalk through life because others are too afraid to wake up. But here is the crucial nuance. The individual man is not hostile to society. He does not seek to destroy or convert others. He simply lives according to his own truth and accepts the consequences. His danger is entirely passive. He is a mirror that reflects back the choices others have made, and mirrors are only threatening to those afraid of their reflection. Nietzsche wrote, "The individual has always had to struggle to keep from being overwhelmed by the tribe. If you try it, you will be lonely often and sometimes frightened, but no price is too high to pay for the privilege of owning yourself." The solitary man has paid the price of loneliness and fear to purchase something invaluable himself. He cannot be owned because he owns himself. He cannot be controlled because he controls himself. He cannot be predicted because he has stopped living according to external scripts. This is what makes him dangerous to systems built on compliance, and this is what makes him essential to the evolution of consciousness. The hermit's journey has 3 phases: withdrawal, transformation, return. We've explored withdrawal, the necessity of stepping away from collective noise. We've examined transformation, the painful, beautiful work of individuation. Now we must address the return. The man who individuates in solitude does not remain in the cave forever. He returns to the world carrying what he has discovered, but he returns differently. No longer reactive, but responsive. No longer seeking, but offering. No longer performing, but present. Jung believed that the individuated person serves the collective by becoming whole. The hermit integrates both. He honors his individual truth while remaining connected to shared humanity. This is the final paradox. The man who lives alone serves others by being whole. He cannot give what he doesn't possess. By developing himself in solitude, he becomes capable of genuine relationships rather than codependent entanglement. By knowing himself, he can see others clearly rather than through the fog of projection. Society will continue to view such men with suspicion, discomfort, or fear. This is inevitable. But perhaps some who encounter him will recognize something in his eyes. A peace that comes not from having everything, but from needing nothing. A strength that comes not from conquering others, but from mastering himself. A freedom that comes not from escaping life, but from fully inhabiting it. And perhaps, one by one, a few others will find the courage to ask themselves the question that begins everything. Who am I when I stop performing for the world? The answer to that question is where the true journey begins. The hermit in us waits for each of us, The only question is whether we have the courage to climb the mountain and light the lantern. The view from the peak is lonely, but it is true. And truth, even in solitude, is worth more than comfort in company. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Carl Jung.